Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. As you know, this is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. And we're going to go on a great adventure today with the Lunar Nomad Oracle. My guest is going to be on very soon. I'll tell you about him in a few seconds, but I want to get into you to let you know about my newsletter first before we get started. My newsletter is a free newsletter. It goes out every Sunday afternoon. In there, you'll find a couple of paragraphs of mundane astrology, which will talk about where the planets are in the universe today, what we're all experiencing as a collective entity. And then I break it out into the individual signs beneath that. I also do a video discussion of what's happening in the world as well. And I also include a version of latest link to my latest podcast in that newsletter as well. You can get to it from my website, chrisflisher.com or turningofthewheel.com. And I encourage you to do that. So without further ado, let's get my guest on. As you know, I often explore other forms of metaphysical subjects just to sort of broaden the conversation. I think that they're all connected. All the various modalities that I talk about are very well connected. And this one is no different. This is called the Lunar Nomad Oracle. And my guest is Shaheen Miro. These are 43 cards to unlock your creativity and awaken your intuition. So it's similar in a sort to a deck of tarot cards, but they're unique in their own capacity. Shaheen is a spiritual nomad working with people all over the world to help them reclaim their power through intuitive guidance, energy work, and spiritual cleansing. As a tarot and tea leaf reader, he conducts workshops and presents nationally. His website is Shaheen Miro Insights. That's SHAHEENMIRO Insights.com. I encourage you to check out his stuff there and book a session with him as well. So, Shaheen, welcome to Turning of the Wheel. It's great to have you on today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great. So, listen, I'm very interested. When I first got this in the mail, I was very curious about the whole idea because as you know, I'm an astrologer. I study a lot. I work with astrology as my primary modality, but I immediately latched onto the lunar nomad piece of it because that implies the moon. And so I'm curious, what is this oracle about, and what makes it different, say, than from tarot or any other modality?
So let me start by saying that the Lunar Nomad Oracle itself is based on a system called Lenormand, which is 36 cards. And in traditional Lenormand, the images are much more like icons rather than actual illustrations. There's, if it's a dog, it's just a picture of a dog. Mm-hmm. If it's a house, it's just a picture of a house. And my background is in tarot. I started reading tarot when I was like 5 or 6. My mom began teaching me as a way of helping me kind of interface with my own psychic abilities and have a place to put that information and to actually work with it. And so when I started becoming curious about the Lenormand images or the Lenormand symbols, I thought this is a really great way for people to use their intuition without being overwhelmed by all of the subtext that comes with the tarot cards. So it really began as my own personal exploration of those symbols and what that looked like visually. And I work as a multimedia artist, so I like to do collage work and drawings and watercolors, lots of different things. But I started putting together these specific images, just exploring the symbol and what that could be. And there was no intention to at first to make a deck for anybody specific or for it to actually, to complete the whole project. But once I began doing that, people started seeing the images and really loving them. And I found that it was just a powerful journey of exploring intuition and seeing how to bring that out through the images. So what makes it different than either tarot or Lenormand is that it's kind of based on that nomad life, that idea of you're going on a journey and it's not necessarily, there's no right or wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about you exploring and finding what works for you. So that, to me, that is what makes it different. And the name Lunar Nomad came from, and as you do astrology, I'm sure your ideas of the moon are similar to mine in that it represents sort of our intuitive, imaginative, creative nature. It represents sort of our innate sensitivity. And I had a friend say to me one time, I'm really interested in your lunar side. Tell me more about it, And he was referring to the fact that I do readings and, magical work, and I study metaphysics. And I thought that is such a great way to put it. So it always stuck with me. And so when I created the deck, I just started calling it the Lunar Nomad Oracle, and it stuck.
It's interesting because the lunar, I mean, to me, the moon in astrology represents the mother, the sense of home, the maternal quality, but it also has that element of, like you say, the intuitive, creative side that I would guess we would attribute that to sort of our feminine side, our deep, sensitive side that we sometimes, many of us suppress. Others are very good at it, but some people suppress that side. These cards have their own symbols, and the symbols, they go from a wide range of characters that we would recognize, like the seer, the aura, woman. There's one on mice, there's one on trees, there's one on child. They all have a sort of, they're sort of grounded in our daily world. In other words, we see houses and trees and dogs and birds and all those things in our lives. And so you've taken these very common daily sort of symbols and turn them into a meaning, so that when you draw when you do a draw on your card deck, you will get these various symbols coming in, and then you've included your own interpretation as to what they are on top of that, correct?
Absolutely. And in the book, I talk about, it's about exploring our lunar side.
Mm-hmm.
But I talk about how we have a solar side. So I kind of think of this as the right brain and the left brain.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I like that, yeah.
Our right brain is our intuition. Our left brain is our sense of logic. And I think a lot of people, when they start doing intuitive work, they think, oh, I'm going into this kind of uncharted territory and there's no logic or rationale to it. And what I advocate in the book is most of us spend a lot of time in our solar selves, because we live in a world that's run by that. Our society is very logical, analytical, show and tell, proof, analysis, all of that kind of stuff. And I think anybody who wants to explore their intuition has to step away from that a little bit and kind of nourish themselves in that, what I call, the lunar side, or the lunar self.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult place for some people to get to, largely because of the lives that we lead and the sort of the influences that come at us. There's so much in the way of, we just get bombarded with imagery and sound bites and news and all kinds of stuff. We get so inundated by that I think it's difficult for us to pause and take the time to tap into that. I think we're sort of overrun by our solar side in that regard.
Absolutely, and that was why in the guidebook and working with the deck, I wanted it to really feel like, and I wanted it to advocate this idea of going more into that lunar place, because we are inundated by the solar so much. But one of the things I talked about in the first section of the book is that the solar and the lunar are not in opposition with each other.
Right.
In fact, the solar self is kind of that fluid container, or is the solid container that holds, the fluid nature of the lunar self. Right. And I think that with the images and the symbols in the deck, they are very everyday kind of common, most of them, or they're things that we recognize that you could see out in the real world. But with the images and kind of the dreamlike quality and the layers, it allows you to be in both places at the same time.
I see.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense to me. I was thinking about, do you ever have the experience of perhaps on a day seeing one of these symbols in real life and saying, wow, the reason I'm seeing that symbol today, or does it strike a familiar chord with you? If you see a particular dog and the dog has meaning to you, does that sort of trigger the response that you would expect to get from the card that bears the note of the dog?
I would say so, because one of the things that I think is fascinating about any type of oracle, whether it be cartomancy or tea leaf reading or, even with astrology, what we have done is we've taken these natural patterns that are happening in the world, and we've turned it into something that we can use, that we can interact with, that's like tangible. So like I always think that an oracle is like a portable omen. Instead of looking for a bird to fly by or a dog to cross your path or whatever, you have this deck and you can interact with those energies. So yes, when I'm out in the world and I see something that really kind of strikes a chord with me, I do look at that as if it were a symbol in the deck. And I also feel like that is how these sort of things began. Oracles began as this journey of noticing patterns and symbols that are happening in the natural world. And one of my favorite things to tell people when they're learning, whether it be tarot or any kind of oracle system, is look for moments in your real life that you can say, oh, that is a whatever moment. That's a moment, there's the dog, or that's an Eight of Pentacles moment, or whatever system you're working with, because it's going to show you how that translates into the images on the cards.
So you think that having those experiences, I would call them sort of synchronistic experiences. You think of them as being, are they validating for the card that you're sort of pursuing? If you had an experience and you sort of read that card earlier in the day, and then all of a sudden you see a dog or a tree or whatever you had mentioned, does that bear a higher significance, or is it of greater relevance to your day?
I would say that I wouldn't necessarily say it is of higher significance, but I would say that it solidifies the information. So one of the exercises that I suggest people do, and I talk about it in detail in the book, when you're working with the cards and you're learning how to read them, I talk about telling a story with the images first. And whenever I teach doing readings with either cards or even with tea leaf reading, one of the things I try to pull people back from is trying to put the story that they're seeing in the cards into context.
Ah.
So for example,
that's sort of backing into it, right?
A lot of kids do that. When they see, the woman, or they see the dog, or whatever image they're seeing, they want to look for what that means in their lives already. And I try to get people to step back from that and just see, what does it symbolize as a whole? So tell a story. So sometimes it can be as simple as a dog crossed my path and I went and sat under a tree and read a book. Now, those are 4 cards that are in the deck, but I just told a simple story with them. Now, that could literally be something that happens to you, or there could be more symbolic significance. But before you try to figure out what that means in your life, before you make a judgment about it, I would say pull those cards in the morning, write that little story down, and then at the end of the day, ask yourself, what was the dog? Well, where was the path at? Where was the tree? I mean, look for how those things can be in context. Mm-hmm. And that way remain objective, but you're still tapped in. So I think in working with intuition, the main thing I always say is be brave, be curious, and just observe and be willing to have the experience. Mm-hmm. Because our rational mind, our solar selves, automatically want us to jump to, this is what it means, this is why it's happening, and that's how we begin to get really stuck in a certain practice, and we don't evolve, I think, spiritually, intuitively, and creatively.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's interesting because you sort of have to. I'm interested the way you say that you sort of, we could easily back ourselves into a situation by overanalyzing. That is a very sort of solar kind of thinking, as you mentioned, using that analogy. I'm wondering. So you pull these cards once a day. Is that what you typically do? And I know that, intuition, more than anything else, I think is like a muscle in some ways, and it requires exercise. And I think that the more you exercise it, the more you tap into it, the more you follow what your intuition is telling you, I think the greater the results can be. I think it comes with practice, in other words, right? But when you pull a card once a day. You do a read of cards as you would with a tarot deck once a day, and you pull a series of cards to sort of get that story for your day going.
So I suggest people start with one card in the beginning, just one card. You can pull it in the morning or before you go to bed, just as a way of checking in, yourself, and just allowing your intuition to come out. So my background is in design, and one of the things that when you're in design, you sometimes just go and look at magazines or look at images just to stay inspired. And it might not be for a specific project. It might not be significant other than you're sort of feeding your visual and creative universe, your creative self. And so I think that approaching the cards the same way can really help people strengthen that muscle of intuition. So just pulling a card and just allowing yourself to just be prompted by it in some way. What do you feel? What do you see? What do you get? You might not even ask a question. You might just be looking at it just to drink in the energy of that particular image. And then throughout the day, you might notice little things that just feel like, oh, aha, that's what that meant. Or that's what it was talking about. And I think of the cards a lot of times as stepping stones into greater awareness of certain things. You can't always know the entire story just from the cards that are in front of you. Sometimes it's taking what you discover in that and going out into the world and having the sort of the lines in between filled in. And
so in many ways, this is sort of like triggering your imagination in some way. You pull a card, and you suggest shuffling them and then doing a random draw.
Yeah. So actually, if you're going to do that exercise in particular of pulling one card and just kind of being open to whatever comes up, I suggest sitting down with the cards, shuffling them, allowing your energy to get mixed into them, and then just randomly pull one. And that could be the one on the top of the deck, or you could go through the deck, fan it out with them all face down, and just pull one out. And doing that, can just be a great way to start your day. But I do have other ways that I like to work with the deck that's not just randomly pulling cards.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. But I think the idea of it sort of, having a card trigger your imagination, does that sort of, and this may not be the right phrase, but it's the best phrase I can come up with right now, is that sort of leading the witness? In other words, is that sort of forcing your decision process towards one direction based on the nature of the card? Or is that liberating?
I think that it's a matter of, are you approaching that card with
the right intention?
Are you being intentional about it? Are you being curious? Or are you trying to make it mean something?
Okay.
So I think that's really the part that people get stuck on when they're first learning to use their intuition and they're opening up to that more lunar side of themselves, is they want to use the same rules that apply out here in the real world, the rules of the solar. They want to be rational, they want to quantify things, and a lot of times what people think that they need when they're learning intuition and learning an oracle is a formula. I want to be able to put A and B equals C or whatever, and that's not how it works. What the cards are actually doing is they're pulling something out of you. So the cards are not the magic. The magic is yourself. You already have the intuition. You already have the imagination. It's inside of you, and it's being mirrored back to you through the cards. And sometimes, if you're just sitting here, meditating with your eyes closed, that's hard for a lot of people to really gain some kind of information that they can string together and have, some kind of insight from it. But when you have cards that start to hold space or become containers for this intuitive information you already have, you start to see the path unfold. But if you look at it as this is what it means, then it can lead you in the wrong direction. And I have a lot of people who do that when I teach classes. They'll flip a card over and they're like, oh, this is my boyfriend, or this is my girlfriend. And I'm like, how do you know? Well, that's just what I think that it is. That's what's going on in my life. Or this is my job. And sometimes what happens is, you've come to a conclusion too soon. That's why I talk about a lot in the part about storytelling with the cards, stepping back before you try to put the story into context. Just look at what the symbols are in front of you. Just tell a story. So one of my favorite examples, not with the cards specifically, but when I teach tea leaf reading, I find a lot of times, because it is abstract, you're just looking at the images formed in the cup. And so automatically people are like, oh my God, what do I do? I don't know anything about this. And I always tell them, there is no wrong way. It's like looking at clouds in the sky. Just what do you see? Just name the things that you see. And I had a friend years ago, we were just all kind of sitting around the table doing tea leaf readings, and she looked in her cup and she said, oh, there's a guy riding a horse in my cup. And I was like, oh, that's exciting. She said, he looks like a knight. And I said, well, did you ask about anything? And she said, well, I asked about my love life and relationships. And I said, oh, it's your knight in shining armor coming into your life. And it was just like so simple. And that is what happened. She met someone shortly after that. But I loved that when she first saw it, like, she didn't put it into context at first. To her, it was like, there's a man on a horse. Oh, it's a knight. And then it was like, but what question did you ask? And that's the other part that I think is very important in using the cards to glean information, is that you ask a question, and your question allows you to make things relative. Mm-hmm. A lot of times people will do a reading and, they'll ask about one thing and then they start talking about another and they don't even realize they're doing it. And I think there's relevance in that, because I think sometimes we go where we need to go, whether we realize it or not. But usually trying to pull yourself back and just remaining present is the best way to stay objective when you're doing intuitive work.
I can imagine that the cards would be a gateway for a wide array of symbols beyond what the cards represent. In other words, you may pull a card, and the way it's interpreted and the way that you go about using that to sustain and build and strengthen your intuition could present a huge array of options. Correct? I mean, this could go anywhere. You may have a explanation and what the card symbolizes in your own mind versus, because you're the author of the deck. But, you can see where people could go wild with that, just as your person did with the tea leaves. That could have been seen by somebody else as something completely different, correct?
Absolutely. So first let me say that the Lenormand system was actually based loosely on tea leaves.
Oh.
Because these symbols tend to come up often in the teacup. So, there's an infinite amount of symbols, and what you choose to work with is, it's really a matter of your own practice. And with the cards themselves and the ones that I chose to put in the deck, you do build your own personal relationship and language with it. And in fact, I advocate when you're learning how to do a reading and you're learning how to tell the story, that you look at what it means to you first before you read through the description. Because a lot of people, when they're learning how to do any kind of cartomancy, the first thing that they want to do is flip a card over and then look it up in the book. And the first thing that I suggest doing is flip a card over and be with it for a moment. What do you notice first? What colors stand out? What images on the card stands out? Where does your eye go first? What does it make you feel? Is there a thought running through your head? Do you suddenly have a person running through your head? Noticing all of those things, becomes really integral to the accuracy and the depth of your reading. But you don't want to just stop at that. You just want to keep going, keep pulling at the thread and seeing where it takes you. Mm-hmm. So when I'm reading for someone, and I don't have to use cards. I'm I have a lot of different, I guess, psychic abilities, though I don't really worry about naming all of those. But when I read for someone, I like to use cards because it gives me a platform. Sometimes I'll get a bit of information psychically, mm-hmm. and then I look for it in the cards because it helps me put it into context more. But I also never get stuck on one card being one thing, because sometimes, I'll read for someone and I'll say I describe a person and I'm like, here's this person, this is what's happening in your life. I'm seeing them having this effect or this intention. And I talk about that, and then they say, well, that sounds like two people. And it's like, well, then maybe it is two people. Let's explore that more. It's not, because you are always evolving, growing, and changing, and because there are many layers and levels to your own wisdom, the cards are always going to evolve and change and grow with you and your practice. And the other thing that I talk about are three different levels of symbolism, three different layers. There's universal symbolism, which is like, what we think of as archetypes and myths and legends, the things that as a society and just as humans we can comprehend, make sense to us. And then there is sort of general symbols. And those are things that tend to make sense to a group of people. And that can be, the town that you live in. It can be the society that you live in. It can be your family. But it's a symbol that has meaning for, a group of people. And one of the examples I often use in this instance is the black cat crossing your path being bad luck. That's something that I think we as, I guess maybe coming from a European background or whatever, it's something in America, I know.
It's a superstition, yeah.
Crossing my path, that's, it's bad luck. And that's rooted in lots of different things, but that's what we've held on to. We've held on to that superstition. So that tends to be a general symbol. But a personal symbol is something that has meaning to you, but might not have meaning to anyone else. And the reason why I use the example of the black cat is that in the deck, there's a card called the Familiar. And the Familiar was a card that I added in. It's not a traditional card if you look at Lenormand, but I added it because I have had this experience many times in my life where I see a black cat and I always say it's my spirit guide and I call her Spooky. And that became a symbol of not only good luck, so the opposite of the black cat crossing your path, but it also became something that I look for when I need confirmation. And then came into my life as this big black cat right here. So that to me is how you should look at symbols and how you work with the deck in, kind of looking at what stands out to you and what do you have a personal connection with. Because a lot of people I know will see the Familiar card and they'll say, oh my God, I have a black cat. That resonates with me. So it automatically takes on a certain meaning for them because of that. But that meaning can evolve beyond that as well. And then some symbols, you don't have any connection with. I mean, I think that the mice, for example, is a card that I think a lot of us understand what that means when we look at it and we talk about, what do mice do and how do they affect our lives? But I think when most people see the mice, at first they're like, well, I don't really know if I get that. But then when they start to dig into the meaning of it, it makes total sense to them as a symbol and not just literally. So it's really an evolving process.
It's very interesting. And so you think that the primary goal of this is really to tap into and sort of add fuel to your imagination's fire, would be a good way of putting it. And trying to find meaning, I guess, in your daily life. But do you see that this has value for the average everyday person who is dominated by their solar world? I mean, this is a real sort of a chance to take a break from that solar world and to tap into something a little bit differently. And it's probably very powerful in that regard.
My intention with this deck is for it to be a door opener for people who, maybe aren't experienced with any type of divination, or people who tend to be really ruled by more of their solar selves.
Right.
I want this to be a great, at least a stepping stone in that direction. And that's part of why throughout the book I advocate using it not just as a tool for, divination or making predictions, but it can be used in other ways. So I talk about 3 different ways of using the cards. The first being doing a predictive reading or looking at what you don't know. So pulling just a card or doing a random drawing of cards and just reading the energy surrounding the situation or the question or the person. And that's when we think of, of most card reading systems and most readings in general. And then I talk about deconstructive readings, where you're taking a story that you already know. It could be a myth, Could be something from your own life, your own personal narrative. Could be something, historical, of historical significance.
Mm-hmm.
But take that, something that you know the beginning, the middle, and the end of, and looking at the images in the cards and trying to find the images that represent the different facets of that story.
Interesting. Yeah. I can see how it has quite a bit of relevance, and it can go. I think it's open to a wide array of interpretation as well, which is, I think, to be interesting. We're speaking today with Shaheen Miro. He's the author of the Lunar Nomad Oracle, 43 cards to unlock your creativity and awaken your intuition. His website is Shaheen Miro Insights. It's SHAHEEN MIRO Insights.com. I encourage you to take a look there. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back in about 2.5 minutes, and we'll continue our conversation with Shaheen. So hang in there. What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
Hi, your host, Chris Flisher here. I've been producer and host of this podcast and radio show for the past 10 years. My goal has always been to provide enlightening, progressive, and logical discussions about where we are as a species and how we move ourselves further down the road towards our greater potential. I believe astrology provides a great tool for observing our progress and awakening our consciousness to becoming a whole, better, and more complete individuals. I have sought to invite the best contemporary guests, thought leaders, and progressive minds to discuss topics that concern us all, regardless of your beliefs. Consider making a contribution through PayPal to help keep the great wheel turning so that I can continue for the next 10 years along the same enlightened path. As always, I thank you for your support. Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. My guest today is Shaheen Miro. He's the author of the Lunar Nomad Oracle, 43 cards to unlock your creativity and awaken your intuition. His website is shaheenmiro.insights.com. It's SHAHEEN MIRO Insights.com. Shaheen Miro. And you can find him on Facebook and Twitter as under the same name, Shaheen Miro. So we're talking about this oracle that you've created. So you're a graphic designer. One of the things I noticed in going through in the deck is they're very colorful, they're very nicely designed. But I noticed that there's a duplicate card for the woman and for the man. And I'm curious, and they have the same number attached to them as well. So how would that vary based on two cards with the same name? How would the interpretation of that vary? Or what's the significance of two cards like that?
Yeah, so the man and the woman card, those are significators. So what that means is when you're doing a reading and one of those cards comes up, it represents a person or it represents a force that's kind of working on the situation.
I see.
And just looking at it from a practical standpoint, or a literal standpoint, it represents a man or a woman. And there are two of them, to be inclusive. So if you're looking at same-sex couples, or if you're looking at a situation where there is, two men who are having a conversation or working on a problem or whatever it might be, then you can have both of those in there. Mm-hmm. And, so the images for each of them is just, my interpretation of two different men, two different women, and again, trying to make it more inclusive. But those two cards really represent a man or a woman that are having influence over the reading or who are a character in the story. So again, talking about if you were to do a deconstructive reading and you were going to tell a story that you already know, the first thing you might do is say, well, this story is about, a man, so I'm going to choose the man first, and then look at what did he do.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, so there's a third way that I like to use the cards, and it is a creative, doing a creative reading where you're actually creating something, much like a vision board. So you're looking for the cards that represent something you want to bring into your life. And so with the man and the woman, you might say, I want to connect with a man, or I want to develop a relationship, or I want to have a better relationship with, my mother, whoever it might be, but you might use that as your starting card.
Mm-hmm. Just to get the conversation going. How many cards do you typically pull in a draw for a reading? I know you said start out with one if you're a new person to this, but what do you typically draw to get to build that story that you're looking for?
So once you get comfortable using one card, and I really think that that's the best way to start, because you don't want to overwhelm yourself, because one card, as you look at the images, there's so much that you can feast your eyes on, you can get kind of lost anywhere. But once you feel comfortable doing that, and you feel comfortable analyzing one card, or you feel comfortable being open to one card rather, I would say the 3-card reading is really helpful for telling a fuller story. And you can think of it as a beginning, a middle, and an end, or you can think of it as past, present, future. But I like to just think of it as, one step following the other, and just kind of looking at what does this set of 3 cards have to say. So you wouldn't do a whole reading for someone. Like if you were sitting down and doing a 30-minute session and it was a general reading and talking about different areas of their lives with 3 cards, that would typically be one story or one facet of someone's life, because we have lots of different stories happening all at once. But as you get comfortable with that process, you might try a 9-card spread, which we talk about in the guidebook, and that can be multiple things that are happening all at one time, or one big story that has many little stories inside of it. And then from there, the possibilities are endless. I tend to be a reader that likes to pull cards in series of 2 or 3s and then build on that as the reading is going along, because I feel like that captures one piece of information, and then once we've talked about that and the information's come through, then we go on to the next thing. There's also a way to work with the cards that is a traditional form of cartomancy, and specifically in Lenormand, that I do not talk about in the book, but I think it is a very interesting system, and it's called Grand Tableau, where you actually lay all of the cards out. And you lay all of the cards out, and then you look for all the stories that are happening. And that's when cards like the man and the woman become really significant, because you start to look for, well, where am I? Where is my, my partner? That sort of thing. But I think to do a nice fleshed out reading for yourself on one subject, if you're asking a question, which I think is good to start with, 3 cards is great.
Interesting. And do you feel as if that by pulling these cards and working out your way, say, from one card, will that be, I can see where it could go either way. Would it be too much information or too little information? In other words, you could build a story out of any card and find where the relevance is. And as a follow-up to that question, does the deck become a predictor or just an indicator of where you are in this place and time? In other words, is it not used for saying what's going to be happening coming down the road?
So first let me explain how I view readings. So I view doing a reading as looking at someone's energetic story. And so we're all telling an energetic story, and our energetic story is the accumulation of our thoughts, our ideas, our beliefs, our experiences, with the world and how we feel that the world responds to us. So in that way, I believe that, we can create things in our lives. Nothing is set in stone in the future, but there's also a path that we're on. And if we keep doing what we're doing now, it's, pretty easy to say that if you're walking toward the wall, you're going to run into it eventually. So yes, I believe that the cards can predict things. And I think that they can predict things very easily. But I also feel like you have choice in what you choose to ask the cards and how you choose to work with them. So a lot of times I find when I'm doing a reading for myself or when I'm sitting with the client, there are better ways to go into a reading. They might say, is this the right job for me? And I would say, well, maybe we should look at, is this job going to be supportive for you? Or is it going to feel good for you? And then we can look at that. And then it might be, well, maybe let's look at, what kind of job do you really want? And how do we get that job? So there are different entry points into the information. And as far as, can you be overwhelmed by the amount of information that shows up in one card or 3 cards? Absolutely. I mean, I think you can spend time with one card and get lots of information. But I also feel like you might get stuck on one aspect of what you're looking at. You might not see the bigger picture. So,
might be too literal then, in other words.
Yeah. And that's the other thing is you can pull 3 cards and you can just look at the literal. You can say, oh, well, here's, like I was saying before, here's a dog and here's the path and here's a tree. So what is that story? A dog walked down a path to a tree? Well, that could be it. That could really be a reading. Depends on what you're asking about. But you might want to break it down and go deeper into it. So that's why in the book I talk about the first card and entering the card and looking at the colors, the shapes, the mood, the tone. And that way you're observing everything that's happening. And then you're moving to the next card and you're doing the same thing. And you'll start to notice themes that run through them. You might notice every card you have has red in it, or that 2 of them have a similar color and 1 of them has a different color. So what could that mean? And you don't want to get caught on every little thing, but that's part of why we look at what stands out to us first. So you might even begin your reading by flipping the card over and just saying, in 5 seconds, what are the first 3 things you see? And just calling all of those out and then writing them down and then moving on. And then you might go back and start to say, oh, well, this stood out to me in this card. This stood out to me in this one. And those seem to relate to each other. And you might start to put more of the story together.
I could see how it would really help having a guide to do this. In other words, a human being such as yourself to do this, because I think it'd be very easy to go down, a pathway that could just go on forever because your mind's going to carry it and you're overthinking it and overanalyzing it. And I think that there's a tendency to do that. I think there's a certain stigma, and that's perhaps not the right word, but there's a certain, I think it probably is the right word, a stigma attached to cards in general, that people think that, oh my gosh, I pulled the death card or whatever, and they think, oh my God, this is the end of my life, and they sort of go awry with that conversation because they're overanalyzing it. And I'm wondering what you would sort of offer as advice, other than having a live reading with you, which I also encourage. What would you encourage someone to do, or how would you counsel them on that simple fact of overanalyzation, or reading too much into it? How do you know where to draw the line?
I think that as you practice, you start to feel, and I know I keep going back to that idea of feeling, but that is a hallmark of being in your intuitive self, being on the lunar side or working with your lunar self. And I think when you start to feel like you're reaching for something, then that's when you're overanalyzing.
You probably are, yeah. If it feels like you're reaching, you probably are. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I find when people start to make what they're seeing in the cards relevant to their lives too soon, then usually they're reaching and they're overanalyzing. And so that's part of why I say step back from it. And, maybe even when you're learning, it would be a better process to not only work with yourself, but have a partner that you're working with. And, see what happens when you tell the story for them and then they tell you, is that relevant? That's why I really love the idea of using the cards not just as a predictive tool or as a prognostic tool, but also in a way where you're deconstructing a story you already know. Because you can't look for more in that story than what you put there.
Right.
And so it gives you a sense of understanding that feeling of when you're reaching versus when you're certain. Because that's the other thing about intuition, and I talk about it in the guidebook. Intuition is neutral. It doesn't say this is good, bad. Intuition just says turn right, not left. It just nudges you in one direction or the other. And all the other stuff, all of the subtext and everything that we add to it, that's our own minds kind of getting lost.
That's what I was worried about, sort of the over-analytical quality of it. I'm wondering if we just pulled a card and just went by what are the first things that come to you in like the first 3 or 4 seconds? Just boom, boom, boom. Get those down and see if they mean something to you and if they have relevance. Because I could see, and I think this is why it's really important to have the question before you approach the deck. I think the basis of the question, I think, is critical. And I think how the question is asked is also critical. But you're not necessarily asking the deck for an answer so much as you are asking the deck to say, I'll provide me with a card, or you draw the card, and then you try to find relevance for that. Or why would that card have relevance for you, as opposed to sort of backing into it the other way, saying it, making the card fit your life. That's sort of the conundrum I think people would probably fall into.
Absolutely. And I feel if you are worried that, because some people are, as we were saying in the beginning, very analytical. So they will want to do that. They will want it to automatically have meaning and relevance for their lives or what they're asking about. And if you feel like you're that kind of a person, then you might, need to take extra care to be intentional. Asking a clear question is always wonderful, because when you start to get lost, you go back to the question. Because when you begin overanalyzing, that's when you find like people are talking about something else that had nothing to do with the question, but they've forgotten about the question. So I usually say, write the question down, and write down the first impressions you have of each card. And then start to write down where those things are, kind of being woven together. How are they interconnected? And when you find that something else catches your attention, or you're reaching, ask yourself, does that make sense to the question? If you're asking about a particular person, and then say you're asking about your boss, and then suddenly you're like, oh, and this card reminds me of my mom, and when I was 3 years old. And it's like, well, maybe that could have significance, but let's get back. You were asking about a person in a specific situation, so before you start looking at all of the other little things out here on the fringe, let's get back to right here, what's in front of us.
So what are the kind of questions people typically ask? What do you recommend that they ask? I mean, you mentioned things like job and relationships and stuff like that. Those are sort of standard things that we might ask anybody. Most people are concerned about things like that. Like, when am I going to fall in love? Where's my ideal job? What do I do next? Those kinds of questions. If you're using it as a guide, whereas that's one method, but your method is more, I think, if I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, is more about tapping into the resources and the inner voice that's already in there. And these cards serve as a trigger for what answers might already lie within you. And you don't necessarily need to be guided from the outside. You've already got the guidance inside.
Absolutely. For me, working with this oracle is about finding your own inner wisdom and realizing that you can make life happen for you, whereas a lot of people feel like life is just happening to them.
Right. Good point. This puts you more in charge. It gives you a tool with which to determine the direction.
And I think any good reader that you go to, whether they're reading cards, or they're just doing psychic readings, or even if they're doing astrology, there shouldn't be a sense of doom and gloom and fear. It's about giving you the answers so that you have the foresight to do what you need to do in order to get to where you want to go, to make your intention happen.
That's a big hurdle, it seems like. As many people, I think, I'm sure you've seen this. People come to people such as us in times of duress. They're always they're unbound. They're aimless. They have no place to go. They don't know what they're doing. They're beside themselves, and so then they come to you with that sort of as a backdrop. and you say something, you pull a card that may have a negative connotation, they're automatically going to go the negative way, even though that may just be. And I'm wondering what do you think it is about people that makes them just default to that negativity piece first? I wonder why do they do that? Do you think?
Well, I think that as a society, and really being in that logical, analytical place that we have gotten to, we've grown into having this lack mentality. We have this
Slack mentality. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
And we really feel like as
It's like we have no control over ourselves.
we feel like we have no control, and we feel like because we have no control, then obviously the thing that we don't want to happen is going to happen.
Right.
And it's just like, and I think in a way that fear, it kind of taps back into our primal instincts for survival.
Right. I think so. Yeah.
If you assume the worst, then you can
live with it. Yeah.
But that takes so much power out of our hands. So to get back to what you were saying before, what kind of questions do I suggest to ask? Well, just straight off, questions that give you power rather than take it away. If you ask a question like, again, just talk, because the questions people want answers to are the basics, like, am I going to have money? When am I going to get the job of my dreams? Am I going to find a relationship? Am I going to meet Mrs. Right or Mr. Right or whatever? And the thing that I like to ask is, first, what do you really feel and what do you want to feel? So we can explore that with the cards. What's happening internally? What is your resistance around this? And, how can you get the thing that you want rather than when is it going to come? Right. How can you make it happen rather than when is it just going to happen to you?
Yeah, there's this misconception that people just that the money comes out of the sky and all of a sudden you're blessed with some sort of rare talent or gift or whatever, and that, like you said, you're waiting for it to come to you. I think this puts the onus back on the individual to sort of go out and get it. And I think that you may not even know what you need, what you want. I think it's part of the problem. And I think this is part of the process of what the intuitive part brings out, is that if you don't know what you want, you can't get it. And I think that by tapping into these symbols and ideas and archetypes allows you to sort of at least get a bead on a direction that is valid. And once you have that direction and you know which way to go, then I think a lot of the answers sort of fall in place. But the question is, would you trust the cards? Would you trust the cards to send you a certain direction?
So first, let me say that most people don't know what they want because they don't know how they actually feel. And they don't know how they actually feel because they never give themselves the space to sink beyond the surface. So again,
they're reactive instead of being active.
Yes. And I think the cards allow you to really tap into what you feel. Mm-hmm. And your question, can you trust what the cards are telling you? Well, really the question you're asking is, can you trust yourself?
Can you trust yourself? Yeah, right.
And, some people don't trust themselves. This is a process of learning to trust yourself. So one of the things I would say is when you start this, I wouldn't, get your deck out and immediately say, like, should I quit my 6-figure job because I feel like I should, go dance in the streets or something? I mean, you want to have part of taking ownership of your life is also being aware of what can happen right now and, what maybe takes time. Magic is a beautiful thing, but it also takes time and work and commitment. So I always say your intention plus your action is what equals change in your life. That's what creates change in your life.
Right. And I think that a lot of it comes down to what I would refer to I think we all have an antenna of sorts. And I think the antenna is sort of the way that the energy or the feelings or the intentions or the intuition comes to us. And, I think we have to be, it's a matter of how mindful you are of your antenna and how are you in tune with your antenna, literally? Do you know what your antenna is looking for? And are you drawing the right signal your way? And I think that can come from, a lot of that is attitude. A lot of it is letting go of things. A lot of it is trusting your intuition. People, your intuition won't let you down.
Right. And remembering that your intuition is not this thing outside of you. Your intuition is part of you. Mm-hmm. And I have a story that I'll tell you because I think it really illustrates kind of this process. So, my book comes out and the book and the deck come out on March 1st of 2018. and I've been planning a book launch party. And this thing has been going on for a while where I'm like, where do I want to have it? How many people are going to come? And I had a space picked out and it didn't feel right. And I kept going back and forth, back and forth. So I looked at another space and I thought, okay, maybe this is more going to suit my needs. And I'm like, it still doesn't feel right. And of course, people are asking me, do you want this space? And it's happening soon, And as I'm sending an email for something else, someone popped into my head and I thought, oh, she's a client, she's a friend, and, she's pretty connected in the community. So I thought, I'll send her an email and just say, hey, do you have any suggestions for a space for an event like this? She wrote me back and she said, oh, I'm doing a pop-up event. I want to host it. Oh. And, and it was like, and so when I met with her, she was like, I can't believe you sent me that email. I was just talking to somebody else about how I saw that your book's coming out and I thought I should reach out to you and you beat me to it. And her doing that wasn't even on my radar. It just popped into my head. And I had no clue where it was going to go or why, but I just said, oh, well, I'll send an email. I mean, what can it hurt? And, and that is what I'm talking about being curious about what's happening around you, what's coming up for you, being brave enough to follow the trail and just observing it, and just seeing where it goes. And a lot of times if you do that, you're going to find the answers way quicker than you are when you are like banging your head against the wall, trying to figure something out. Or it's like when you're trying to remember something and you walk away and do something else, and then it just comes to you.
Right, exactly.
It's not distance anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's key.
And that is a very common trait. I think that the world we live in is we are just bombarded with all the stimuli that we can't really cut through that fog. That rain shower that comes down on us from all these outside influences. I love the idea of the lunar being sort of this intuitive, maternal, creative, childlike quality that we all seem to possess, and the solar being more of the bigger picture. And I think the idea of being a nomad, gives you the ability to sort of just wander. Do you think someone could get overly analytical with this?
Absolutely. I mean, I think someone could definitely. I think some people will want to stay in that safe place of being analytical and will, want everything to be by the book.
Right.
And I think as an Aquarius, I'm kind of like a little bit of a rebel. So I'm always like, yeah, just see what happens. So I think the important part for me of writing the guidebook was to continuously give people support and encouragement to trust themselves. I created the deck, I wrote the guidebook, and I say throughout many times that this is just what I've experienced with the cards. This is my intention and my interpretation. But if you just decide the hell with all of that, this is what it means to me, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But I feel like some people, because they're afraid to trust themselves, they will tend to get really analytical. I feel like when we become over analytical, mm-hmm. we're in a place of being afraid of something.
It really is about recognizing your honesty and your intention at the end of the day, because I firmly believe that your intuition is never going to let you down. If you don't feel right about something, you should never follow it. There's something inside of you that is primal, that may be primal, or it's connected to the greater cosmos, that is saying, don't go down that road, or don't go down that path, or whatever. And yet, we are besieged by these pulls, and people go these ways. I think that it's important to, at the end of the day, the voice inside of your head is the voice that's right. And you've got to find that. And to discount that or to sweep it under the carpet is probably false. I can see how people could get overly analytical. That's what I was alluding to earlier. But I think you've got to, if you find yourself going down that path, you get pulled into this thing where you start to worry and things are going wrong, and you're building all these images in your head that are sort of built out of, paranoia or just plain worry, that you're probably doing yourself a disservice, and you really need to reel it back in and perhaps rethink what you're doing, what your purpose is. I think the question is really important. I think that's, a very important question. And they typically tend to be about these sort of lifestyle sort of decisions, right? I mean, job, career, relationship, all those things.
Absolutely. And one of the things I like to do is just be open to what happens. And, you might ask one question and that might lead to another, and that is okay. I find most of the time when a client comes for a session, they ask about one thing, and what they're really asking about is something completely different. And I go there with them. I'm like, okay, well, we'll start with this question. But then, it's like I start to feel that under the surface, they're really asking about this. And as soon as I start to talk about that, I can just see people's energy change. It's like suddenly there's a sense of alignment because they finally connected like the head and the heart, the solar and the lunar, like these two parts came together and they finally heard what they really felt. And so one of the things, and I'm pretty sure I talk about this in the book, or it might have been in some of the other things I've written, but I always say that the lunar self says I can dream, but I can't build. And the solar self says I can build, but I can't dream. So they really need each other.
They do. So you're going to have to build a solar nomad oracle next.
I thought about that. I'm like, how do I, and one of the things that when I was writing it and I was thinking about how is this going to be received by people, I thought, are people going to feel too inundated by this lunar information? Like, is it too dreamy? Is it too abstract? Is it too ambiguous?
Right. It's open to many interpretations, I guess is what it could be. Yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways it is. And there are going to be some people who might think, oh my God, I don't know what to do with this. And really that's the point, because we're in that other side so much that I think if you really want to build your intuition, you need to be in the unknown. You need to be a little bit uncertain, because that's how you're going to really learn.
Right. Yeah. It's only when you have those hardships and there's that doubt that it pushes you to find an answer and come to some sort of conclusion. Yeah, I get that. Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Well, we've run out of time. I knew we would very quickly. It's an interesting subject. I'm really curious about it. I'm anxious to do a reading on myself, at least give it a shot and see what I pull. We've been speaking today with Shaheen Miro. He's the author and the creator, the designer of the Lunar Nomad Oracle, 43 cards to unlock your creativity and awaken your intuition. His website is ShaheenMiroInsights.com, www.Shaheen, SHAHEEN, MIRO, Insights.com, Shaheen Miro. He's also on Facebook and on Twitter as Shaheen Miro. And I encourage you to check out his stuff. It's really interesting. The cards are beautifully designed, and they are different from what you may have seen in Cardmancy before. If you've done the 52 card spread, or you've done the Tarot card, the Knight Rider deck, or whatever Ritter deck, these are different cards, but they certainly serve a similar function. And I also have one more question for you before we go. Why 43?
So the traditional Lenormand system that it's kind of built on, it's like the bones of it are Lenormand, is 36 cards. And then I added cards to it based on my own personal symbology.
Okay.
So the seer, the bats, the aura, the familiar, and those were all things that felt really important for me as far as my intuitive work that I do with clients. And those, I feel like, are cards that tend to be kind of extra significant in a reading for whatever reason. So those were my that's what channeled through me into this deck.
Came through your antenna and got to you. Yeah. Well, that's great. Again, my guest today has been Shaheen Miro, the Lunar Nomad Oracle. It's going to be coming out on Wiser Books on March 1st, as we can see it. I'm sure you can find it. You can get it probably at Amazon and all those places, as well as the other usual outlets. Website, again, is Shaheen Miro Insights, SHAHEEN, Miro, M-I-R-O, Insights, all one string of words. ShaheenMiroInsights.com is his website, and he's on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and all those things that we all are on these days. So check him out and see if you can find him out there. And Shaheen, thanks so much for coming on today. Interesting topic to talk about.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Good.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.